What is up, everybody? It is JT Sports. I am back to you guys with another episode of the JT Sports podcast, and I'm here with my college football week 7 takeaways and reaction. Going to be giving you guys some of my thoughts on what took place this past weekend in college football. Now, if this is your first time listening to the JT Sports podcast, welcome. I appreciate you for tuning in. We're going to be talking about how good is Oklahoma State after beating Texas. LSU pulls off the upset against Florida, but they still part ways with head coach Ed Orgeron. And lastly, my reaction to Georgia dismantling the Kentucky Wildcats. Make sure that you guys go ahead and follow me on my social media platforms on Instagram and Twitter. You can follow me on those at JT Sports _. Once again, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at JT Sports _. And lastly, if you haven't already, make sure that you are subscribed to my YouTube channel, which is JT Sports. So I'm going to start off with the big news of the day. LSU pulls off the upset against Florida 49-42, but they still decide to part ways with head coach Ed Orgeron after the season. Now, there were reports coming out saying that this wasn't really something that just took place. Like, this is something that was already in the works of Ed Orgeron and LSU coming to a mutual agreement to part ways dating back to last week. There were people saying that players didn't want to play for him and coaches didn't want to coach for him. Now, ever since LSU won the national championship in 2019, led by Joe Burrow, and it seemed to be the perfect storm, everything has kind of went downhill for that LSU program led by head coach Ed Orgeron. Now, a lot of people try to discredit Ed Orgeron for that national championship. I feel like nobody really gives him enough credit because everybody just says, well, he had Joe Brady, he had Dave Aranda, he had Joe Burrow. But I mean, you have to give the man props for assembling that good of a coaching staff and having a team like that come together and be as good as what they were. Like, I just feel like you just can't simply discredit somebody just because the guys he had around him. I mean, he did hire him. Now, he hasn't really done a good job of picking his coaching staff ever since then. He lost a lot of talented players to the league, and there are a lot of non-LSU fans who are disagreeing with the decision to part ways. And I understand where those non-LSU fans are coming from. They're saying that Ed Orgeron needed more time. They didn't really allow him enough time to rebuild. But LSU fans are saying when you're playing in the SEC and you're coaching at LSU, a program that consistently brings in top 5, top 10 recruiting class, you don't rebuild, you reload. Now, nobody's expecting you to compete and win a national championship year after year after year, but people do expect you to be a really good football team. At least 9 to 10 wins minimum is the expectation for that LSU program. And Ed Orgeron, ever since winning the national championship, this LSU program didn't really ascend. Anytime a team wins a championship, they should always ascend or be somewhat around that level. LSU was still supposed to be around 9-10 wins. Now, last year, it was a COVID year, so everybody made the excuse for him saying, give him another year, see what happens a year after. And then, this season kind of hasn't really went as planned. Everybody was expecting LSU to bounce back and be a legitimate contender in the SEC West. They lost to UCLA to open the season. Then, they had a couple of, disappointing losses there. But, I mean, you got a big win against Florida. But a lot of non-LSU fans, they're a little bit surprised. But LSU fans, I definitely understand why the decision was made. And even then, I feel like there's a good amount of LSU fans. I feel at least like 30% of LSU fans out there don't really agree with the decision to part ways of Ed Orgeron. And I'm kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum, I kind of understand why LSU decided to part ways with Ed Orgeron. I agree with the decision to part ways with Ed Orgeron because, I mean, after that 2019 year, everything has kind of went downhill. He's had some off-the-field issues, but one thing that I don't agree with is the narrative that, he lost the locker room, players didn't want to play for him, coaches didn't want to coach. Like, yesterday, to me, it looked like those players wanted to play for him. I feel like if you completely lose the locker room, it will be indicated by the final score. And I haven't really seen any games played this year where LSU just completely got outmatched and outclassed. Now, maybe that would have happened when they played Alabama this year. But, I mean, I haven't really seen any games where LSU was just completely blown out outside of that Kentucky loss when Kentucky beat them 42-21. But, I mean, I look back at that Florida game yesterday, and I didn't really see a team that gave up on them. Maybe a couple of star players like Derek Stingley, Keyshawn Boutte didn't like him, anything like that. But I mean, this team played very well under him, and they were able to pull off the upset. Like, I really felt like if he completely lost the locker room, this team wouldn't have had defeated Florida, which Florida is a pretty solid football team. Not the great Florida team that we saw last year, but this is still a pretty decent football team. This is the same Florida team that took Alabama to the wire early on this season. So, I mean, what's next for LSU? Who do you hire? Okay, are you going to try to pay big money to lure Luke Fickell out of Cincinnati? I think that Luke Fickell has a better chance leaving Cincinnati for the LSU job than I think he does leaving for the USC job. Now, ultimately, I still feel like he's going to stay at Cincinnati. First of all, I feel like Cincinnati going to the Big 12 Conference now is going to help out recruiting. On top of that, Cincinnati is a team that right now is on the brink of making college football history, maybe being the first G5 program to ever make it into the college football playoffs. And right now, this team is in the national championship conversation. Luke Fickell has built something really good in Cincinnati. And on top of that, I think his son currently plays on the team. So, I mean, I understand why he could make the move, more money probably. On top of that, you have a better chance to remain contending for national championships at LSU compared to Cincinnati, where you may have some down years per se, because maybe you may be capped in terms of how good you could be when it comes to recruiting. But overall, I still feel like there's a good chance that Luke Fickell could stay in Cincinnati, but it's pretty hard to turn down that LSU job because there are a lot of people saying that the LSU job is more appealing than USC. Then on top of that, you have a couple of other names thrown out there. I think Billy Napier probably could be a potential realistic candidate high on LSU's list because you got to remember, the Louisiana Raging Cajuns play in the state of Louisiana, so I'm pretty sure whoever's doing this coaching search for LSU has probably done a lot of due diligence on Billy Napier because he's literally probably right down the freaking street, and he's done a fantastic job with that Raging Cajuns football program, so I definitely feel like he's probably going to be amongst the top of their candidates when it comes to doing this coaching search. But who's going to be next, really? Because, I mean, I really feel like LSU is going to bring in a big name. It's not going to be some guy that we never heard of before. Now, what's next for Ed Orgeron after this year? If he finishes off the season on a high note, they win 7-8 games, then he's most likely probably going to be employed at another school. Now, I don't know if he'll be employed at another P5 program. He may be like a group of 5 coach. He may end up going to a G5 program and being a head coach there. But I don't really know if we'll see him get another P5 job. A lot of people keep saying, him to USC. I don't really know if USC will bring him in. Some people are saying Miami. I don't really know if Miami will be able to put out the money, able to, bid for Ed Orgeron, because I do feel like if there's a market for Ed Orgeron, I don't really feel like Miami is that committed to the football program that they would want to bring him in. Miami normally likes to go the cheap route when it comes to bringing in these coaches. They normally bring coaches in from like a P5 level or something like that and, bring them up to a larger scale school. But I mean, for Ed Orgeron, I definitely feel like he's going to be a head coach somewhere next year. Rather, that's at a lower Power 5 program or at the G5 school, because I do feel like there are some characteristics about Ed Orgeron that a lot of people kind of overlook. I feel like he definitely is a guy who can get you motivated to play for a game. He's definitely somebody who can fire up. I definitely feel like he can get the most out of his players at time, as we saw last year when they pulled off the upset against Florida. There were a lot of young players playing in that game that he got a lot out of in that game. He also gets the most out of the younger players on the roster, in my opinion, so I really feel like he does have some really good traits. Now, he's not really that great when it comes to assembling a great coaching staff, which is something that, is a big indictment against him, because he's not really an X's and O's coach. He's not really, an offensive guru or a defensive guru. He's more of a program builder per se, or like a motivator. He's a pretty good recruiter, but something that he kind of hasn't really done all that well outside of 2019 is bringing in the right people for his coaching staff. 2019, when he brought in Joe Brady, was kind of like the perfect storm for him. So I'm really interested in seeing what happens with Ed Orgeron. I definitely feel like we could see him being a head coach somewhere next year. But for LSU, man, the coaching search is going to be really interesting. And I only have like 2 names off the top of my head right now, but I'll probably come around sometime later today or sometime this week and give you guys a more in-depth list of potential candidates who I feel could potentially succeed Ed Orgeron next year, after this year when they part ways in 2022. Oklahoma State defeated Texas 32-24. How good is Oklahoma State is the question that a lot of people are asking. Now, when I watch Oklahoma State, and I've watched them a lot this year for some reason, don't really know why. Maybe it's because of the uniforms, but I've been really intrigued in this Oklahoma State team because this team reminds me a lot of Iowa. Their offense isn't really all that great, but their defense is really phenomenal. Now, Oklahoma State's defense in the second half of this game only allowed 7 points, and they outscored Texas after halftime 19-7. And Texas was only held to 24 points, which Texas offense has been kind of clicking over the last couple of weeks. So this Oklahoma State defense is legit. This is definitely one of the best defenses in college football, in my opinion, top 5. But this offense, it needed to do what it had to do to win the game. I mean, Spencer Sanders didn't really have an impressive performance. 19-32, 178 pass yards, a touchdown, a pick. Jaylen Warren is like the team leader on this offense. 33 carries, 193 rushing yards, 5.8 yards per attempt. And like I said, this Oklahoma State team reminds me a lot of Iowa. I see a lot of similar comparisons. When you look at Spencer Petras, not really all that great. Can't really win you a game with the ball in his hands. Led by running back Tyler Goodson. So you look at Iowa and you look at Oklahoma State, like I see 2 teams who are pretty identical in their philosophy. Iowa wants to get in close games. Oklahoma State wants to be in close games. Iowa isn't really a team that's built to win a shootout. Oklahoma State, oddly enough, isn't a team that's built to win a shootout. They need to force turnovers to win the game, and their defense pretty much has to be their best offense. Like, the defense has to not only be able to get stops, but be able to make sure that they're in good field position. So when I look at Oklahoma State, I definitely feel like this is a really good football team. Are they going to go undefeated? I doubt it. They're going to lose to somebody down the stretch. I'm not saying who it's going to be. It probably could be Oklahoma. It could be somebody else. But I mean, I know they're going to lose somewhere down the stretch. But I mean, that still doesn't take away from the fact how good this team was. I was really impressed with their performance that they had against Texas. And remind you, even though Oklahoma State was the higher ranked team heading into this matchup, Texas was still going into this game as a 5.5 point favorite. So the odds makers in Vegas didn't really have that much confidence in Oklahoma State to win this game, despite the fact that they were the more higher ranked team. And that goes to another point. You know, a lot of people are flipping out about the AP poll, and the AP poll doesn't really matter. You know, a number by your name doesn't represent how good of a football team you are. At the end of the day, what represents how good of a football team you are is what you actually do on the field. So for Oklahoma State, they're probably going to be ranked inside of the top 10, but it doesn't really matter until the college football playoff rankings come out in like a couple of weeks. But I look at this Oklahoma State team, man, like I would like for them to, you know, be a little bit more efficient on offense, because Jaylen Warren is pretty much the only weapon that they have in this offense. This offense doesn't really have a lot of dynamic playmakers on the outside, especially when it comes to wide receiver. This is just a really odd Oklahoma State team, because I've been saying this for like over the past month about Oklahoma State. I haven't really recalled the last time I remember Oklahoma State's defense being the way they win football games, because normally when you think about Oklahoma State, you think about Mike Gundy, you think about them throwing the football all over the place. You think about the incredible wide receivers that they have had come through, like James Washington, Tylan Wallace. So it's a little bit weird that, you know, we're thinking about Oklahoma State as being a great defensive football team. This is a team that up front is really good. They create a lot of plays, a lot of havoc plays, which havoc plays are like plays that result in a loss. They're pretty disciplined. They don't really make a lot of mistakes. So, I mean, yes, you can win this way, but is it a sustainable way to win? Not really. Eventually, there's going to come a time when this offense is going to have to be able to carry the load. This defense was able to force 2 interceptions from Casey Thompson, and Casey Thompson really got rattled in the second half of this game. But when you look at this Cowboys team, like, this is still a really good football team. But in terms of being one of the best teams in college football, I wouldn't go that far, but I definitely feel like this is a team that definitely is being a little bit overlooked because of the style that they win games. And this is why I try to tell people, in college football, style points don't really matter. All that matters is how you win a game, because you could struggle against one team that you should blow out and then beat a team that nobody expects you to beat the following week. Like Florida, for example. Florida didn't really look all that impressive against FAU and USF, despite what the final score indicated. You know, they had quarterback controversy. Well, Alabama comes into town, and Florida narrowly lost that game. So then, a couple of weeks later, you go back and you look at Florida now, losing to LSU. Like, this isn't the same Florida team that lost LSU, that lost to Alabama. So, I mean, like, I really feel like college football now, too many people are worried about how many points you score on offense. A lot of people only care about style points, and I just feel like a lot of people don't really appreciate the teams like Iowa. They don't appreciate the teams like Oklahoma State that's winning in a more traditional fashion. And even though you do have to have a better offense than what Iowa and Oklahoma State have right now to be a legitimate contender, I mean, this is still a team that is definitely in the hunt to win the Big 12 championship, and I definitely feel like they can give Oklahoma a really competitive football game. And we're going to see them match up against Oklahoma later on this year. But I mean, this is a pretty good football team, man. This is a better football team than what a lot of people are giving them credit for. And I think not enough people are giving Oklahoma State the acknowledgement that they deserve, because they just don't win in pretty ways, or they are not lighting up the scoreboard with a lot of explosive plays on offense. And that's kind of what college football has came down to nowadays. You know, it's all about how many points you score on offense. Nobody really seems to care about defense until you don't have a defense. You get what I'm saying? So I'm really high on Oklahoma State. I can see them making a New Year's Six bowl game. I can see them winning the Big 12 this year. Not saying that they are, but I definitely feel like they're definitely in that conversation. It seems like everybody's just rolling with Oklahoma to win it, but I feel like Oklahoma State has a pretty good chance to win it as well. So the last thing we have to talk about, I have to give my reaction to Georgia pulling apart and dismantling the Kentucky Wildcats. I mean, they were like a broken down car, this Kentucky team was, and Georgia pretty much took them to the scrapyard. They won 30-13. This game wasn't really close. Will Levis, I felt like he played a pretty decent game, 32 of 42, 192 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. Kentucky's offense really couldn't get anything going. And I was telling people when I was previewing this game that if the run game for Kentucky didn't get going, I don't think Kentucky was going to have that much success on offense. And I didn't think the run game for Kentucky was going to get going either. Well, there were a lot of, eager Wildcats fans who came down and told me I'm wrong. I did lazy analysis on the team. This Kentucky Wildcats team is going to fight. They're physical, and they're going to have success running the football on Georgia. And I said, okay, despite the fact that Auburn and Arkansas didn't have success running the football on Georgia, 2 of the best rushing attacks that we have in college football right now didn't have success running the ball against this Georgia defense. I'm pretty sure you're not going to have success running the football neither. And a lot of Kentucky Wildcats fans were mad at me for saying that they challenged that claim. Well, Kentucky only had 51 rushing yards. Georgia had 166 rushing yards. So I think that tells you everything you need to know. And some people were thinking that maybe Kentucky could compete with Georgia up front, and that didn't really happen. And I don't really think there's a team out there right now that's capable of competing with Georgia up front, because you look at Alabama, like everybody's quick to throw out Alabama, things like that, but I don't really think that this Alabama offensive line is equipped to handle the monsters that they have up front on that Georgia defense. Jordan Davis is a monster. There are some people that are making claims for him to be in the Heisman conversation. Definitely understand why. I feel like he's one of the more dominant defensive tackles that we've seen since Ndamukong Suh when he was playing for Nebraska, Quentin Williams a couple of years ago when he was playing for Alabama. I really feel like Jordan Davis is the real deal. Now, should he be in the Heisman conversation? Yeah, I mean, I could see it. You definitely could make the argument, because I definitely feel like when he's on the field, he's one of the best players in America. Now, Stetson Bennett had a pretty good game. He was 14 of 20 for 250 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. Like, Stetson Bennett, surprisingly enough, has been one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC this year. There hasn't really been tons of great quarterback play in the SEC this year outside of Bryce Young and Matt Corral. But after those two, I definitely feel like you can make the argument and say that Stetson Bennett has probably been the 3rd or 4th best quarterback in this conference this year. Unless you want to go with KJ Jefferson at number 3, then I wouldn't get mad at that. But I mean, Stetson Bennett has definitely played fairly well. Now it's going to be interesting to find out, when JT Daniels comes back, because I do still feel like JT Daniels gives them the best chance to win. I just feel like Stetson Bennett hasn't really been put in a situation where he has to win the game. All Georgia really is doing is handing the football off, and that's pretty much all that he really has to do. Now, he has improved his accuracy a little bit, but I just want to see what he does in a big-time environment against a team that's just as good as Georgia, like Alabama. What is he going to do in a close game? What is he going to do with the ball left in his hands to have to win the game? We don't really have those questions answered about Stetson Bennett. We know that Stetson Bennett can be a good game manager. Georgia is running a really simplistic offense, really similar to what they ran with Jake Fromm. They didn't really ask Jake Fromm to do all that much. All they really wanted Jake Fromm to do was to hand the football off and take care of the football when they asked him to throw it. And when you look at Stetson Bennett, that's similar to what I'm seeing with him right now. And he definitely can get you to a title game, but can you win a conference championship with Stetson Bennett? Can you win a national championship with Stetson Bennett? That's where the question lies, okay? Like, Georgia is beating people just because they're purely better, but what's going to happen when you face off against a team that's just good as you? We don't really have that question answered, you know? And, you know, I'm not trying to take anything away from Stetson Bennett, but I still feel like JT Daniels gives Georgia the best chance to win. You know, we didn't really get to see Stetson Bennett against Clemson earlier on this season. We saw JT Daniels. You know, if Stetson Bennett plays in that game, maybe it could have been a different outcome. But what was more impressive to me is the fact that Kentucky was held to 3.5 yards per play. Like, do you not know how impressive that is? Like, you don't really see a lot of teams nowadays being held to less than 4 yards per play. Kentucky got outgained 243 yards to 416. Like, this was just a physical mismatch. And so far this year, there hasn't really been a team in the SEC that Georgia has played that looks like they're more than capable of being able to handle this defensive line. And I don't really think that there's a team in college football this year so far that I've watched that looks like they're going to be able to match up well up front with Georgia's defensive line, and that's including Alabama, because Alabama's offensive line is far from perfect. You know, they still have some things that they're trying to figure out. So Georgia is the best team in college football right now. That's not, you know, a hot take. That's not something that should be up for debate. They're playing some really good football right now. They're beating really good teams. Like, you can't use the argument of, well, who have they played? I mean, you beat Arkansas, you beat Kentucky, then you have to play Florida in a couple of weeks, which should be a really intriguing game. So when I look at Georgia, man, this is a team that is peaking at the right time. They're hitting on all cylinders. And we got to stop judging how good teams are simply by if they play the team with a number by their name, because there are certain teams that I don't need to see you playing a Alabama or Ohio State or Clemson every single week. Like, you don't need certain schools to play the best opponents or the best competition week after week to, measure how good they are. There are just some teams that we just know just are simply good. So I'm really excited to see what Georgia does this year. Georgia was my preseason championship selection, and we knew that they probably were going to roll through the regular season. But my question really is, okay, what are they going to do when it comes down to the SEC Conference Championship game? What are they going to do in the playoffs? So I'm not really surprised with the success that Georgia's having with them being my preseason championship pick. I'm just ready to see what they're going to do when they are matched up in the SEC Championship game, which most likely would be Alabama at the moment. But you guys let me know, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, how you guys feel about Georgia. Like I said, this is the best team in college football right now. This defense is outstanding, and this is probably the best defense that I've seen in the college football playoff era so far. Like, I haven't remember seeing a defense this good since Alabama, 2012, 2011, when they had D. Milliner. Like, they had a bunch of guys. Like, there was one defense that Alabama had that was incredibly nasty. I forgot what year it was. It was one of those early Alabama teams in the early 2010s when they had Agent McCarron at QB. But those Alabama defenses were nasty, and this Georgia defense is just as nasty. Like, that front seven is unbelievable. Like, there are a lot of Wolverines. There are a lot of, human created machines that they have, because some of these guys aren't human. Jordan Davis is a freak of nature. I've never seen a guy with his size, over 300 plus, that can move the way he does, laterally. Like, I'm just really impressed with this Georgia defense, man. So you guys let me know how you guys feel about Georgia beating Kentucky down in the comment section down below. And I appreciate you guys for tuning in and listening to this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. podcast. I will see you guys shortly with another episode. Make sure that you go ahead, leave a 5-star review, share this podcast episode on your social media platforms if you enjoyed.